Peace to the tribe, peace to the collective. In this video, we will clearly explain why what you think is self-love is actually narcissism.
It is a defense against deep inferiority, and some people will engage in the defense so often as a constant fight against a deep, deep sense of inferiority and nothingness, actually, particularly at higher degrees. They see nothing. When you're engaged in that defense against the deep inferiority, you might engage in a defense of constant or frequent efforts to assert the fact that you're superior.
We are going to reference one of the OGs in the spiritual game, Till Swan, to elucidate us on what actually is self-love and what it is and how do you compare it to narcissism.
How do you tell the difference between self-love and just being selfish? I see all the time about people setting their boundaries and claiming their peace, which is great, but at what point does it go from preserving oneself to being over the top and hurting other people by our demands?
Self-love is not demanding of anyone else, right? The minute we get into the space where we're like, well, this is my truth and therefore this is what you get to do or not do, we're moving into a realm of control. So again, we've got these two concepts enmeshed. They need to be unenmeshed. Self-love ultimately must include the love of others.
Self-love must ultimately include the love of others, which is counterintuitive to the concept of self-love, where you think that you need to love the self. But if you got your notebooks open, one of the first points is Till Swan is making, like it can go in one ear and not the other when it comes to your understanding, but we have to kind of drill this in your heads that self-love overall is the love of other people.
I know that for some of you, it's going to be very important for you to tap into your own best interests and almost treat taking other people's best interest as a secondary step to that because you have been so hyper-trained towards the opposite. But this is why I say that. At a universal level, everything is one. So ultimately, at this certain level of existence, there's no difference between self-love and the love of others.
If everything is one, true self-love is no separation between love of yourself and the love of others, because at a conscious level, at a universal level, at a cosmic level, at a level of truth, not in a level of delusion or illusion, in a level of truth, I and you are the same. So I love you just like I love myself, like I love my wife, like I love my children. That's true self-love. So how you show up for other people and how you are responsible in other people's lives, making sure that you are supplying them with positive energy, blissful energy, love. That is the true mechanism of true self-love, and not whether you personally are getting taken care of. So let's continue to react.
It's all self-love. However, here we are in this time-space reality where we experience some degree of separation, where we have, our own best interests, and sometimes it can come into the conflict with somebody else's best interests. When we're in that type of situation, obviously it's best to look for a win-win scenario. And when people
Facts. Like, as an adult, as a spiritual being, as somebody who knows how to create things in their lives, we creating things based on a solution. So say, for instance, you have a problem with somebody. That's a problem. Now, how do we resolve this? We have to constantly fixate on the solution. So the solution is never let me retreat, let me run away, let me be angry, let me be mad, because these are the result of narcissistic traits and tendencies.
Profoundly do love themselves, and I mean genuinely love themselves, you will see that natural inclination towards a win-win scenario. What you're watching when you're watching people who are slipping into this sort of self-centered behavior is that this is an individual who came from an experience, usually a family experience, of extreme dysfunction. Now, the message that is inherent as the foundation of a dysfunctional family dynamic is every man is actually for himself or herself. And in that family, even if you're looking at codependent strategies,
when you growing up in the Black community, when you growing up in a dysfunctional community, whatever, poverty, whatever the case may be, It creates a crab in a barrel type of mentality. It creates a one for all, I'm for myself, even within the family dynamic. Like we family, we related, but we not actually helping each other thrive and win and succeed. If you're coming from that type of situation, that's counterintuitive to success. So what generally happens if you're growing up in a situation where you're seeing everybody have this mentality, this is how you view what love is. The person that have been successful, the alpha, or the person who've done great things, everybody is going to look to this one idealistic person and strive for this thing. And this is the model of self-love, but in reality, it's more of a mental illness.
Is where it seems like there's a member of the family that's always putting other people first and is almost like sacrificing themselves. It's not actually for other people. That self-sacrificing behavior is innately self-centered. It's the strategy they specifically found that they think is going to get them their needs met, right? So everybody in this family dynamic is essentially acting in their own best interests. Now what'll happen, especially if you're dealing with almost like somebody who falls more to the codependent strategy technique in their early life, once they get into self-love, they don't have a context for what that looks like in a healthy way. All they have seen in their life is people prioritizing themselves in a much more direct way. So what you usually see is somebody swinging the pendulum from codependent strategies over to like overtly narcissistic strategies. So it looks like that pendulum swing where all of a sudden you've got somebody who's like, I don't really care the impact on you because it's about self-love, you know?
And even deeper, people who come out of traumatic relationships, right? And this is why certain ideologies like Reformation or the healing journey and, soft life, or these types of concepts, like they're all rooted in this was a messed up situation and now I'm seeking a positive situation. You had it right the first time. Maybe the circumstances wasn't right. Maybe the conflict resolution wasn't right. Maybe the communication wasn't right. But then don't alter your strategy. There are specific tools to have a successful relationship. Not getting into relationships is not going to create a better relationship for you. You got to actually learn how to succeed in relationships and understand the tools. And one of the main tools is self-love, which is the actual love for other people, meaning to sit down, to listen, not to judge, or even get in tune with yourself, to trust yourself to guide you to people, and to understand how to develop conflict resolution strategies in between two people or more who are in a couple.
And so what's important to understand is it's not like when you go on this journey to self-love, you need to be aware of some kind of arbitrary line where you cross it and all of a sudden you're in a space of selfishness. Because underneath that selfishness is the perception of scarcity, ultimately, which has nothing to do with self-love. It's just that in committing to self-love, you're running into that basic dysfunctional thinking and way of being within relationships and within the world. So it's the dysfunction that needs to be dealt with. Again, we need to enmesh the concept of practicing self-love, or unenmesh the, sorry.
So say you coming out of a toxic relationship, a dysfunctional childhood. The solution is not to isolate yourself, to heal yourself. The solution is to actually deal with specific parameters, specific understandings to help you deal with that PTSD, to help you address that trauma and talk through it, to see it holistically. Whether you want to self-medicate, books that I really like is Radical Forgiveness by Colin Tipping, or Future Memory. These books really help me look at the past differently and not so centered in my personal experience, because the past is flexible, the present is flexible, and the future is flexible. It's very important to understand that you need to heal your psychology. So even a simple way to heal these particular traumas would be to meditate regularly, because as you meditate, you are healing the brain-heart complex. Now, another way for me is to microdose, and stacking with lion's mane and pussy poppers, because all of these things promote healthy brain health and neurogenic reparation. And these are the things that are actually healing the trauma in a space where if we're not addressing the trauma and we don't know how to specifically heal the trauma, then it's not getting healed by isolating ourselves. And if you don't want to do psilocybin and if you don't want to meditate, then you should really find somebody that you know specifically that's getting therapy. Do your research on a specific therapist, a psychologist, a medically trained person that's going to help you with the trauma that you dealt with in your relationships. If you are in a relationship, you guys are always arguing and fighting. Well, the reality is that you two are not able to solve your problems. You need to pull in a third party. You need to get a mediator. You need to get a counselor. You need to get a third party, non-biased judge to help you solve these problems, to find solutions so you can actually love and respect one another.
Unenmesh this practice of self-love from the dysfunctional family dynamic with which we grew up in, because we're sort of enmeshing them and then applying one to the other and then swinging the pendulum over to this narcissistic behavior, which is just every man for himself. And now I have a great spiritual excuse to do so, which I could never do in my childhood in a direct way like my brother or mother or whatever could. In a space of self-love, right? What you're profoundly doing is learning how to directly act in the best interests of your aspects, how to profoundly re-own aspects that you have disowned. And from there, you come up with a powerful personal truth. That powerful personal truth is just your truth. Now, that's one piece of the puzzle. You get to look at the other person's personal truth and try to find that win-win scenario. And if you can't find a full-blown win-win, what you're looking for is the highest and best for both people. Right? So I like all this to say it's very important to understand that demands is not about self-love. Demanding other people behave in a certain way is just us falling back into that dysfunctional dynamic where we feel like we have to fight for our own best interests against other people.
First principle that we're dealing with is self-love is the love of other people. And once you first get that within your head, then now you are not supposed to be bare knuckle boxing people, right? Whether it's talking about your mother, your father, brother, sister, lover, people like that. When you are in relationship with people and you are in the space of self-love and you're loving them, then you can't necessarily hate them. You can't necessarily demand things from them and really have all of this negative energy towards them, because at one level it has nothing to do with them, and at the second level you haven't actually gotten the help that you needed. So whether we're talking about narcissism, bipolar disorder, PTSD, or a whole slew of negative emotional psychological problems, what really needs to happen is that society needs to get help and properly diagnosed. Whether we're doing self-diagnosis or medical diagnosis, we need to really get to the root and crux of the problem, because what we are calling self-love is actually narcissism. And this is what we don't understand.
And there may be times, people may put you in a horrible zero-sum game over the course of your life. There may be times where you have to act profoundly in alignment with what is in your best interest, but you can actually make it so that's not necessarily against. Even though the way that you...
Like I did in my last video about old boy that got cheated on for the last 11 years. Like, the reality of these types of certain situations is that you can be strategic enough, and if you have love and heart and compassion for people, you can put them in a better situation, separate yourself, and continue on with your life. If you're going to argue and fight, that's not creating a resolution. When two adults are sitting there screaming their head offs at each other, what really needs to be said is, we need a mediator, we need a judge, we need a unbiased third party to help us solve our problems, because I'm not hearing you, you're not hearing me, and we're not hearing each other. So now we're falling into a narcissistic based relationship and not a relationship based on self-love. Why? Because the fundamental principle of self-love is the love of others. Unless we are dealing with a psychological break that says, no, I need to take care of myself. I need to be in my lower chakra, in my fight or flight.
How narcissists affect your solar plexus chakra. So narcissists are almost always operating out of their solar plexus or any chakra below that. They are mostly in their fight or flight mode or in their ego. Their energy doesn't reach the heart chakra. So if you are around a narcissist, you might have developed these behaviors yourself, or you might have become imbalanced in your ego. So you might have a victim identity, or you might have an overly entitled identity. It is hard to have a balanced identity with a narcissist. Physically, this can show up as skin allergies, food allergy, food intolerances, weak stomach, weak digestion, diabetes, low BP, high BP, not being able to eat what you want, how much you want, bulimia, anorexia, overeating, etc.
And I haven't evolved into the heart chakra of unconditional love, which is true self-love, the love of others.
You behave is not ultimately what the other person would quote unquote want. You don't have to make it such a against you or such a because this is my truth, you have to, fill in the blank, do something or act in a different way. Anytime we're getting out of the zero-sum game, basically, which is a profoundly self-loving act, we're moving more and more and more towards self-love. Here's the reason I say that, right? We as people struggle immensely at understanding that it's not possible to play a zero-sum game with anything else in existence without it ultimately hurting us. So ultimately, if we do play a zero-sum game with something or somebody else, that will come back to bite us somehow. Which is why it's so important to make that differentiation vibrationally between me acting very powerfully for what is my healing.
In reference to people, and there's exceptions to the rules, but the rule is the golden one. Treat people the way that you want to be treated. So if I'm yelling at you, screaming your head off, the reason why it creates bad karma, even if I'm right, is that I'm no longer operating within the golden rule, the karmic, dharmic ascension rule of I am going to love you in abundance and full bliss. Why? Because I want to receive that. If there is specific conflict, me and this person have specific ways that we resolve it, even to resolving to an exit with no hard feelings.
Rather than me needing other people to behave in a specific way because of what I need, right? All right, so the more that you weave through and work through your interpersonal dynamics in childhood, the more that you develop trust in your relationships with other people and make them safe, the more self-loving we are going to be. These are, again, two concepts that are like symbiotic, but we're not treating them as if we're symbiotic because we grew up in these dysfunctional situations where we feel like self-love ultimately has to be against somebody else or has to be demanding of somebody else, when it doesn't.